On today's episode, we speak with the amazing successful author Tracey Maxfield on how children can get themselves out of a rut and get inspired to move forward, as well as how to deal with depression. Coming up. In today's episode, you're going to feel empowered, unstoppable, and gain the tools to accomplish anything you can dream of, using real examples from some of the most successful entrepreneurs in the world. That's all happening today on the I Can Show. Hello everyone, welcome to the I Can Show podcast. My name is James Martin, and on this show, we're here to help you to succeed in your passion by showcasing the realm of possibilities. I am super excited because today I'm speaking with our very first international guest. This became a huge shock to me. I remember getting this one email, out of the blue from Tracey Maxfield, and she was asking if she could come onto the podcast, and I was like, wow, I'd love to, And when I was sort of asking her a bit about where'd you come from and started getting to know a bit more about her backstory, she comes from British Columbia, and right now I'm in Ontario. She's on the other, so I'm on one side of Canada. She's on the other side of Canada. I'm like, you're on British Columbia. So here we are having our very first, sort of international guest. I remember even, and right now, as we're talking to her, there's actually a 3-hour difference. So, right now it's 4 p.m. in the afternoon. And when I was talking to her, it was 1 p.m. in the afternoon in her time. So it was interesting dealing with some scheduling, but we made it work. There were times where I had to cancel and she had to cancel and we had to sort of reschedule things, but we made it work nonetheless, and I'm super excited because she has a book out about how to get yourself out of the rabbit hole. In other words, how to get yourself out of depression, because I know that depression can affect a lot of people around the world, and it can really prevent you from succeeding and just, being the best that you can be. So I'm super excited to have her on board. But before we get to our interview, I would love to ask for you to please consider subscribing wherever you're watching this or listening to our podcast. This is episode 20, and so we've got 19 other episodes. Last week we spoke with an amazing internationally inspirational speaker and author, Traceys Schmitt, and it's been so amazing the amount of people we've had a chance to talk to. It's been an absolute abundance and pleasure, and so super excited. So please check out the other episodes when you have the chance, as well as please stick around to the end of the episode to check out more about, merchandise and upcoming news. All right, right now, let's get started by bringing on Tracey Maxfield. Tracey, thank you so much for coming on board the show.
My pleasure. Looking forward to it.
So Tracey, why don't you give us a bit about your backstory? Where do you come from? What's your background? What are you up to right now?
Okay, well, the easiest is I have an accent. So I actually come from Wales in the United Kingdom. Born in Wales, did my nurse training there. Actually came to Canada in 1987. I believe I was around 23. And I've been here ever since. Moved around a few places in Canada. Right now, I published a book last year in the April, Escaping the Rabbit Hole. And since then, I've kind of been promoting the book, but I've been focusing more on my new life journey, for want of a better word, my mission, which is trying to create more awareness and education to help children and teenagers living with mental illness, and actually about bullying as well. Those subjects are very close to me, because I have a mental illness, I have depression, but also what resulted in me writing the book was significant, very, very bad workplace bullying. So I kind of know what the new bully is like. I mean, back in my day in school, which was in the 1960s, 70s, bullying was not of the pedigree, if that's even the right word to use, that it is today. Certainly you were intimidated and scared by some of the bullies, but they were mainly the real mean girl that only had friends because everyone was scared of her, or the thug, the real thug whose dad was usually allowed. you didn't have groups of bullies and the cyberbullying, right? There was no such thing in those days as cell phones. But I soon learned that, yeah, you can be bullied in the workplace, but when you come home, guess what? That can continue because you got a phone. And so I can understand just how it made me feel. And it made me feel terrible and actually resulted in my nervous breakdown or the acute depressive episode. And I thought, well, how on earth do we expect our kids to manage? I mean, I'm an adult, right? I have years of experience. I have social skills. I have coping mechanisms. And it was difficult for me. So how on earth are we expecting a 7-year-old, a 17-year-old, even a 20-year-old to try and make sense of all that's going on around them? Because it's bad. And so that's kind of my mission. That's my focus right now.
And you're absolutely right. Like I never really went to school. I was homeschooled, but I have been to like college and different areas in my life where there was bullying, and you're absolutely right. A lot of it does take place online. There's a lot of cyberbullying, and it's kind of sad, especially when I see about the children nowadays and the type of stuff that they have to deal with, whether that's a lot of it has to do with pleasing everyone, whether that's pleasing everyone through your Instagram posts or your Twitter posts and your selfies and whatnot. But even the biggest thing I'm seeing right now nowadays is the need for a relationship. Like everyone, all the kids must have a boyfriend or a girlfriend. That has to happen in order to fit in, feel cool, and feel wanted.
And what I find scary is that 7 and 8-year-olds are wanting girlfriends and boyfriends. 7, 8 years old. I'm like, are you kidding me? I wasn't even ready and I was 14. It's so sad because we are like, I know kids have access to way more things than we ever did, and the world has changed, but we are forcing adulthood on them, and yet we're not reciprocating by giving them the skills to deal with what comes with being an adult. I mean, at 8 years old, at 11 years old, you should not be having a boyfriend. Yes, have friends as boys, but to consider it dating and we are serious and exclusive, and then when things fall apart, which inevitably they will, I mean, we all change, then that they actually, some of them turn to terrible bullying and victimization, but others actually commit suicide. And it's like, oh my goodness. I mean, you ended your life because he or she, and boys are doing it as well, broke up with you. And it's so sad that they think that is their total life. That's what it encompasses, this very small portion. And they have no idea about future and goals and how things change. And that's what's scary, because I mean, I'm going to hop back to when I was in school, but I think it's true of when you were in school. You were always looking towards what a future would hold for you and what you maybe saw your path as. And obviously you deviate from that, but you kind of had an idea. And nowadays, you go and talk to kids and say, what would you like, so what are you thinking of doing? Do you want to go to college? Do you want to travel? And they really is looking at me going, well, I don't know. I mean, there are some kids that have very concrete plans, and you can see that, maybe it's the background and the support system they have that have influenced that. But so many of them are like, they've taken the living for today to such an extreme that they really can only see their future with this person or these friends, and now take that away and there is no world for them anymore. And we have a lot to do to change that mindset, because it's deeply entrenched, and society adds to that, right? I mean, we all have to look like the Kardashians, and we put in this perfection and image of how you dress and how you look. And it's way too even sexual for these girls and boys to even understand what they're dressing as. You know, you dress like a 30-year-old and you wonder why you're getting advances from all different levels. And again, we have the predators and the pedophiles. And we haven't given them the skill set to understand dressing in a boob tube and mini shorts may be cool, but this is what you're going to attract. Do you know how to deflect that? Do you have the confidence with maybe some of the comments that come with it? And it's almost like you need to have a little 101 education when you know, with kids, when they go and start doing this dating and buying these clothes and the hair extensions and the plastic surgery. I mean, you know, it again, and I know that there are so many parents out there that are so opposed to that and are really struggling fighting their teenagers against that. But then you also get parents that feel it's perfectly acceptable. I mean, I was with a friend a couple of weeks ago down in the States, and her 11-year-old wants to have eyelash extensions. 11, and hair extensions. And it's like, oh gosh, 11. What, you know what? So yes, I'm trying not to be that type of person that, you know, when we were kids, and you would always see the older person and say, oh, you have no idea, and I'm not going to be growing old and, you know, want to be like you. And so you're trying not to be judgmental and difficult in the way you see things. But I would hate to be a kid today. I absolutely would. It's overwhelming to be an adult sometimes. So how do we, you know, because the pressures we're putting onto them, it's like it's perfection, it's acceptance, it's brilliance. You have to be well educated. You have to get a high paying job because you want to buy all the perks, because you want to have the nice car and you want to have the nice watch, because that's what is indoctrinated into us. And it's like they don't understand that there's a work ethic that leads to that, because that's never been shown in the celebrities that flaunt that kind of opulent wealth. So yeah, it's difficult, and yeah, it's going to take a lot of work. It's a whole society issue, right? It's not just schools can educate, parents and families definitely educate, but we have to have it from the top down as well to start implementing changes.
And you know what? Like, I love where this conversation is going. And I mean, we could talk about this all day long. We really could. And I'm for sure going to ask you about like your other stuff and your story and, you know, and the book and whatnot. But I love where this conversation is going. And I would love to ask just one final question, because I feel this is a very big topic. And I feel there are probably a lot of listeners, you know, checking out this podcast who are probably dealing with that sort of like, you know, high school, elementary school, maybe even just bullies in their everyday life, whether that's the workforce or just anywhere. And so, you know, and obviously you speak to a lot of different kids and teens on how to deal with that sort of bullying and challenging and being accepted and how to deal with society and whatnot. What's one big piece of advice? I'm just going to ask one final question before we move on. What's one big piece of advice that you usually give to kids and teens to help inspire them to, you know, deal with everyday challenges?
The one big tip is, remember, it's never about you. It is never about you. It is always about them. It is about the bully. But it's hard for kids to understand that. I mean, because even as adults, we have that difficulty. So, I mean, it's really got to, they have that mindset of, this is not me. It's not personal. They're hurting in their own lives over something, and they're having pain and they're picking on me. But I urge anyone going through that, you absolutely must report it. You must tell your parents, or if you're feeling they're not being responsive, you tell the school counselor or the teacher or a trusted adult. It may be your coach, your hockey coach outside of school. It may be your girlfriend's mum, but you absolutely must share it with somebody, because if we don't step in, and again, bullies also need help, and that's an important thing that we need to remember is, yes, there is accountability and it must be dealt with appropriately, but I would say 90% of the time when we look at the person who's doing the bullying, they have some significant life issues going on that they really need help with. There's only about 10% of them are truly psychopaths and sociopaths, that they have no awareness of what's right and wrong, and they don't care, and they won't change. We see hints of that as they're growing up. They're the kids that start abusing pets. But those are just a very small percentage, and rarely do they actually go into that victimization of bullying. They actually tend to be more of the loners, because their brain functions differently. But no, you absolutely must find someone to report it to, and you must share, because what they're finding is that the more people that stand up to the bullies, so if you have your collective, like say it's just 2 friends or even 3 friends, but you stand up to them, they actually stand down and the bullying ends. So 70% of the time they're finding that they're getting success, because again, a bully's aim is to make you cry or make you run away or fall and hurt yourself, or just make you feel really worthless. And then they can get that little high, which only lasts temporarily, that they have to do it again. But that's what they want to see. If it doesn't elicit a response, and in fact you had the other people stance and they're going, you know what, that's really mean, and if you don't stop that, we're all going to report this. All of a sudden the bully is like, okay, and they do start backing down. And I think the more kids do that, and the more they stand up, because they say the person that walks by and sees someone being bullied is as bad as the bully. They're no better. And so the more kids start to realize that they actually are strength in numbers and start standing up, the hope is that maybe we can get rid of some of the bullying. We will never get rid of it totally, but I think if people intervene sooner rather than later, and there's supports and education with accountability consequences attached, then kids will at least feel safer and protected going to school. Because right now they're saying that lots of them are saying that teachers just don't treat it as serious or important, or if they have anti-bullying policies in school, and every single school should have their anti-bullying policy displayed throughout the school for anyone to read, and then implement what they say. We will not tolerate this, we will not tolerate that. If they don't stand behind it, then they're giving the bully free rein. And so accountability has to go back. And in fact, in the United States, there's actually 2 states right now where it is illegal, and they can now be charged, the bully. And in the majority of schools in the United States, they're actually taking a stand that if bullying occurs and it's reported and the school does not take action, they've broken their anti-bullying policy. And so there's a number of laws that can come into effect that the school can actually be fined and penalized now. So, and the more that parents, and this is what, when I give talks and everything and do podcasts, I explain to parents is, yes, you are protected under the Americans with Disability Act and the American Education Act especially, and there's something similar in Canada. If your child misses school and you're in a public school, everyone has the right to public school education, from the age of usually, I think it's like 3 to 18 or 19, depending on where your year cuts off. If you are not attending school because of fear of being bullied, then that's illegal and the school has broken the law. And then if your child has autism or has maybe a medical or mental health condition or a physical ailment, similarly, the families can take it up because they're breaching the American with Disabilities Act. So there's lots of lawyers starting to utilize that when you go to court. And again, it's horrible that lots of parents have to do that. More and more parents, if they're taking a stand in their parent-teacher meetings now, the PGA groups, and are starting to quote those laws and the infringement, because once it goes to the school education board, they have to investigate. And then funds are allocated, and it can have a huge repercussion. And if, as parents get more confident, go into the schools and saying, look, I can tell you right now, you've broken this law and we're taking this further. If the school doesn't act, then, as I said, there are consequences. And I think parents need to become more aware that they have rights and they need to make the school aware that they're breaching those.
And you know what? Like, I would also like to add sort of my 2 cents worth where, you know what? I've always found that any form of bullying, whether that's in school or it could also be in the workforce, in family, it could be anywhere. Anytime you get bullied, try and combat that bullyingness with kindness. Combat meanness with kindness. You know what I mean? Because the bullies are trying to get you to be angry and be sad and make you do the wrong thing. But if you just keep coming back doing the right thing, then it's not working. The bullying is not going to be effective. So, next time someone tries to give you a hard time, you can just be like, okay, well, that's your opinion. Thank you so much for sharing your feedback or your criticism or whatnot. Have a great day.
And I 100% agree. And it's a mindset that we really need to start teaching our kids from the moment they go to school, that how to deal with emotions and anger and stresses and comments, because you're always, throughout your entire life, you're always going to meet someone that's may say something that's mean or snippish to you. That doesn't constitute bullying unless it's deliberate and ongoing. But somebody who says something mean to you and you immediately feel yourself responding, it takes a big person, but it is the better person that kind of just straightens their back and looks the person. And usually if you can make eye contact with them and either just look or just smile and say, have a nice day, and walk away, kids don't realize, and lots of adults don't realize what that actually does to that person. Because if they're having a bad day themselves, it kind of makes them think, oh wow, I was right. But if it's a deliberate and that person is just known to be just mean and gets down on everybody, when you do that, she may then laugh and say, who do you think you are? But that's gone internal, because you have not given them what they wanted. And that was, they wanted to see your pain and your reaction. And so it is, and it's that mindset of, they used to say, the old saying was, what, water off a duck's back. It's like, it's hard. And I mean, since I've gotten out of I used to be the type that would not go face to face, but I would just kind of look at the person and say, wow, you're pretty mean, aren't you? I wonder how long you can continue to get away with that. Or I would just say, well, aren't you a nice person, and kind of leave it like that. Now, I don't usually engage in words. I just kind of look at them and smile and just make eye contact, because bullies can't make eye contact. They find it very difficult to maintain eye contact. And once you pull that gaze into them, you will see their nervousness, because they'll start looking around or looking down or shifting around. And that should give you the courage to know you've actually won and you didn't do anything. You didn't do anything. You didn't need to hit them. You didn't need to say anything mean. You just looked them in the eye and just walked away. And you should walk away feeling proud, because you did win at that moment. You really did. And we really need to start instilling those values and that understanding of how to go negotiate life's little obstacles for the kids, because I think it'll give them more strength and be more empowered, that they'll be better able to deal with some of the difficulties and the challenges that are going to hit them when they become a teenager, and then if they go to college or enter the workplace. Because, you know, school is a microcosm of what you're going to have in later life. They're just bigger.
And you're absolutely right about, you know, how to handle all that. And the bullying is everywhere. It's literally everywhere. So right now I'd like to sort of change the conversation a bit and make it more about you. So why don't you share about sort of your backstory and, you know, your journey along in your life?
Okay, well, let's go all the way back to my childhood. So had a very difficult childhood. Was born into a highly abusive, dysfunctional family. In those days, of course, everyone knew what was going on, but nobody did anything, right? Because it's like, you never share your private business with the neighbors. From the age of 2, I wanted to be a nurse. I wanted to be a nurse. That was my passion, bandaging my teddies, putting slings on. I wanted to be a nurse. By 5, I wanted to come to the States. And that was because, I mean, we had a steady diet of BBC and American shows. And so, you know, you kind of look at the BBC British, and then you'd look at America and you go, I'm going to America. And so that kind of, I loved America and everything to do with America. And looking back on it now, I realize that even at that young age, I knew what I was living in and I needed to get out. And by setting those 2 goals, and I never thought of them as goals, but they kept me going. When I wanted to end my life, when I tried to run away, I knew I would have to go back and face them. Every time, like, my father was just terrible. I'd have to barricade myself in the room and stay there for up to 2 days, sometimes without food, and couldn't go to the washroom. And so that's what kept me going. You know, when you're old enough, you can leave home and you will never have to go back. And so that's what happened. When I left home at age 19, I went nursing, and then from that led me to Canada, because once I was qualified, I thought, okay, now I'll go nurse in the States. And they were like, oh no, you need a green card and it's a little more complicated. But Canada, being a Commonwealth country, it was, well, all you have to do is sit your Canadian nursing exams. And so they said, you have a choice. You can either study for them in Britain, or you can actually go to Canada, work as a nanny or a housekeeper on a permit for a year and sit your exam. And I thought, well, perfect. I'll go to Canada. And so I came over in 1987. I worked as a nanny for a couple of years, sat my exams, and started working as a nurse in Canada. And so I've nursed ever since. My speciality has always been palliative care, gerontology, and dementia care. And that was my passion even when I was in Britain. And then I would say I experienced my first depressive episode when I was around 27. I had just got married and had to return home it was a year after I got married in 1990. Went home to see all my friends and everything, and family that were unable to come over to Canada for the wedding. And that's when everything that I'd ever really suppressed about my parents came to the surface, when I was sitting in my old bedroom with my new husband, and I didn't sleep a wink. we sat up all night and I told him everything that had ever happened to me in that room. And he was ready to run thinking, what have I married? Because it was just the horrors of everything. And that awakened so much, but it also awakened that fight, because now I was an adult and I could actually, and I'd always stood up to my father, which was why the abuse continued to escalate. But I finally decided I didn't really have to put up with this anymore. And so I severed ties with them when I returned to Canada. And then a year later, my mother, it was a suicide 3 a.m. call where it was, you have to talk to him. He's going to kill himself because his only daughter doesn't want him in her life and all that. And that's what triggered my first depressive episode, because I was on the phone for an hour, wanting to scream, do it, put us all out of misery, you're a horrible person. Instead, I had to talk him out of it. Hardest thing I ever did. When I phoned the next day to check how things were, I was basically told, why are you wasting our time? What are you phoning for? Mind your own business. It's got nothing to do with you. And that was it. It was like over the next month or so, I could just feel, I just didn't want to do anything. I would go to work and I would go through the motions with patients and things. But I finally, after about 3 months, I said to my husband, I need to see a doctor. I feel like I'm hanging outside on a window ledge, and every day someone is prying my finger off the ledge, and I think I've only got my little fingers left, and something bad's going to happen. I'm going to fall. And so that's when they diagnosed my first episode of depression, with medication and counseling. After a year, I was able to come off the medication, and always had that kind of dysthymia, that low mood, but nothing compared to that episode. And then about 12, 15 years later, lots of life stressors, and then had another episode. And at that point, saw a psychiatrist who said, based on the information you're telling me in the family history, on my father's side, every single female in the family had depression. And he was one of 14 children. And he said, I am 99% positive you have genetic depression. And I think you're always going to be predisposed that when you have a number of life stresses happen, you end up just having a major depressive episode and just plummet. And so he said, I think what the best thing to do is, once you start recovering from this episode, we keep you on a low dose of antidepressant for the rest of your life, hopefully to prevent any further attacks, because they say once you've had one or two, your chances increase every 10 to 15 years. And so I was on a low dose antidepressant, still working as a nurse, was given a new position, way more responsibility, way more stress, and that was my decline. So I started in the job. At the same time, my husband and I weren't able to have children, so our 2 dogs were our children. A dog died unexpectedly, like within 4 days. And at that point, I just felt like a little switch go off in my head. It was just so very weird. I just felt different. A couple of months later, we separated. A couple of months after that, he bought me out of the house. I had to buy my own place, move into somewhere on my own. So I'm now filing for divorce. The other dog stayed with him, so it was custody dog. I'm living alone. And because of the separation, even though he wanted it, everyone sided with him. So I lost my network. And so I kind of threw myself into work. So basically what happened was I ended up having an acute depressive episode because I was facing depression on my own and suicide. I ended up writing a book. The book was published last year, Escaping the Rabbit Hole, My Journey Through Depression. Through the book, I was asked to go and talk to some middle school kids, ages 11 to 15, about mental illness. And actually, if you go on my website, you'll see there's a number of illustrations, and those illustrations are from the book. And the kids actually have read my book and could identify with the illustrations because it conveyed what they couldn't say in words. And it was through my meeting with the kids and then returning for an 8-hour all-day human library that I ended up hearing the stories of from 65 teenagers came to see me that day and confided in me what they were going through. And I was just absolutely mortified that they were going through not only the bullying, but it was the suicide attempts and the mental illnesses these kids had and the depression. And when I came home, I did some research. The numbers just blew me out of the water. I didn't realize it was that bad. And I thought, okay, I'm changing my focus from like adults and mental illness, which is what I was originally to support my book. I thought, no, now I'm gonna help the children. And so that's what I did. In April, in September, I sold my home. I donated most of my possessions to charity, and I started going down to the States and giving talks. I've been on radio shows, lots of podcasts, TV shows, and my platform is engage, educate, and empower children and teenagers about mental illness, suicide ideation, and bullying, to give them the skill set and the knowledge to help them manage whatever it's, their symptoms, empower them that there is a life for them, that they're loved, and that there is a future for them. And also in so educating them, you're educating the schools and the counselors and the lay people and their families. And because in order to help these kids, a community has to come together. Like there's a saying, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it takes a community to raise a child. It takes society. And so the more they have an understanding that, guess what, you can have clinical depression with suicide ideation at 7 years old. You can be bullied at 10 and kill yourself. It happened. And they need to understand that these are not one-offs. This is I'm going to quote the United States, because even though you're broadcasting from Canada, but today in the United States, 16 teenagers will die by suicide. 3,140 kids in grades 9 to 12 will attempt suicide today. That's every day. 3,140 grades 9 to 12 will attempt suicide. And they anticipate there's another 1,000 to add to that because they haven't got all the numbers from the lower grades. But they think there's got to be at least another 1,000. Isn't that horrific? That over 4,000 kids in one country, and this is global, it's not just the States. In Japan, September 1st is the highest suicides ever. Japan and South Korea have the highest suicide rates amongst kids in the world. And so that, yeah. we're dealing with a global crisis. In the States, they call it the silent catastrophe because no one wants to talk about it. And yet it's happening and it's getting worse and worse and worse. And so that's what I'm trying to, quote, make a difference. That's my new life journey.
100%. And yeah, you're absolutely right. It's funny how, depression really comes from just, one thing after another, after another, after another. At the same time, to even counter that, it just takes one small act of kindness again and again and again, one little thing again and again and again, to really sort of undo all that sadness and the feeling of fear that you've had for such a long time. And it just builds and builds and builds and builds. And it can either build in a positive way or build in a negative way.
Absolutely. And that is my mindset. On all my social media accounts, it's sprinkle kindness everywhere. One act of support and kindness or understanding does so much for a person. We don't know what people are going through when we see them. They may seem like they have it all. They don't, but we perceive that they do. And it isn't. You don't know what's going on behind closed doors. You don't know what that person is. It's the never judge a book by its cover, right? It's, you know, that girl, she may be the high school prom queen. She may be beautiful. Guys may be fawning all over her. She's just perfect. For all you know, daddy could be assaulting her at home. We don't, and that's why it's always treat people with kindness and respect. And if there's anyone listening out there that has a mental illness or is feeling suicidal or is just thinking, I don't know what's wrong with me, I'm very anxious, or I'm doing the same thing every day like 20 times and it's bothering me, or I just feel so sad, I don't want to go on anymore, please reach out and tell someone. Absolutely. Because if you tell someone, immediately you will feel a little better. And if you get help, and then you have a team that can work with you and give you the support and the skill sets that you can even live with this. Because, I mean, 80% of lifetime mental illnesses will show signs and symptoms by the age of 24. So we know that's going to be most of our childhood. But if we help you develop the skills to recognize, oh my goodness, I think my depression or my anxiety is starting again, or, ooh, I've got 3 stresses just happened in my life. I got an exam, my boyfriend just dropped me, and I have depression. I think I could be going down that path. That you recognize that and you start implementing what you need to do to help you move past that point, but also to reach out and tell people and get support. Because if you receive support and treatment, within 70% of kids will have all these symptoms resolved within the first year. But if it's left and it just festers and festers, it's like the wound, right, that never heals. You won't wake up and it just goes away one day. It is still there. And so I urge, reach out for help, because you don't want to die. You know you don't want to leave this world. You know that there is hope and future and possibilities and that people love you. They may not have told you, but you need to be open to them and share with them what you're going through, because when people give you kindness back, then you are loved. And I think this is what kids are missing. You know, everyone is so busy and everyone has lost that sense of connection because they're on social media, and sending kissy faces and hearts on social media still does not equate with the physical connection of a hug or a touch or, you know, a pat on the shoulder, or a parent or an adult figure that's very important to you coming up going, I love you, kid. You may get on my nerves sometimes, but boy, I'll walk through fires of hell for you. You know, you're a great kid. And that's what they want to hear. You know, the mum or dad that writes a note and pins it on their mirror. I know I should take time with you, but I love you. I am so very proud of you. And that's what kids want to know, that it's okay if you make a mistake and you crash dad's car. It's okay if you didn't make the high school football team. It's okay if you flunked chem. If you share and work together, you can get around that. It's not the end. But if you don't tell and share, negative voices in your own head are your own worst enemy. You and your voice is your harshest critic. And we have to stop listening to that and be open to receiving the kind words and the support and the love from other people. And it's, as I said, it's tough out there, but please do not go through this alone. Just one person who says to you, you mean something and I love you, then your life is worth saving. And you know, I mean, you have a wonderful future ahead. Right now it's crappy. It probably feels like crap and that nothing is good and you can't see anything. I was like that. All I saw was darkness and this tiniest chink of light, and it will get better. It absolutely will. It will.
Exactly, and what a wonderful way to end off this episode, because normally, Tracy, with our other speakers, we have the tradition on the end of the episode where I've asked all my speakers, what's one big piece of advice you would give to our audiences to really show that they can succeed in their passion. You gave like 47. So thank you so very much. And again, I appreciate your wisdom and the value and the time that you brought in. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was Tracey Maxfield. And if you want to get to know more about Tracy and even check out her new book, the links are going to be in the description of this podcast, wherever you're listening to this. And by the way, so just a quick question of the day, guys. Normally I would say, like, what inspirational, thing that Tracy said today really, really inspired you. But I also like to ask, like, have you ever dealt with bullying? Have you ever dealt with depression? And if so, what have you done to sort of come out of that and how to counter that and deal with the problem at hand? Because I think that could be very, very beneficial to, other audiences and other viewers that are coming and checking this out for the first time. If you could please leave that would mean so much. And by the way, I'd also love to invite you to check out our merchandise shop at shop.spreadshirt.ca/iCanShow. You can get all sorts of fantastic clothing, t-shirts, sweaters, hoodies, you name it, with the I Can Show logo to spread that message of positivity. And when you purchase the merchandise, you're further supporting this podcast so we can continue to build this and create more episodes. All right, please join us next week when we listen to a really good friend of mine, Sharon Smith, who is the owner of a great hair salon. Got a fantastic journey about the hair industry for everyone that's listening. That's next week. Take care. Bye for now.